Alright, hello everyone, it's me, Oliver, and today I thought we could do something different from our normal videos. So on this channel I've already got a couple of videos on solving chess puzzles, and I've also got a video where I play an instructive game in Owen's defense, e4 b6, and I explain every move as I go. And we could play a game today actually. However, I thought we also might analyze a game, and played by two super grandmasters, Magnus Carlsen, the current world champion, and Wesley So. This was a game in the Caro-Kann, and my favorite opening as black against e4. It was played on the 18th of November in 2017. And in this game, Magnus Carlsen blundered a full piece. So there are going to be some tactics involved. So let's see what we've got. E4, C6, D4, D5. This is the starting position of the Caro-Kann opening. The Caro-Kann defense is centered around this exact setup, C4, D5. And you're basically trying to get light squared control from the get-go from the beginning of the game. You focus your pawn structure on light squares. So for example, one line in the advanced variation, that's what it's called, is e4, for example, bishop f5, knight f3, and e6, and you have this very nice light squared control. And your position might be a bit passive in the future. It might turn out to be a bit passive, but it is a very solid opening and very simple to play as well. So the key principles and the ideas of the Caro-Kann are incredibly easy to remember, and I recommend this opening for everyone rated from 0 ELO to, I mean, even super GMs like Magnus Carlsen and Wesley So play this opening, so this is really an opening that you can employ at all levels of chess. But there's many lines. There's knight c3, there's knight d2 to try to protect this pawn like that. There's also the f3, that is called the fantasy variation, but I won't go into much detail about the fantasy variation right now. But in this game we get the exchange variation from Magnus Carlsen. So e takes d5, c takes d5, and some Caro-Kann players may argue that the position is slightly better for them, since white has lost his central pawn for black's flank pawn, and that might be an advantage in the future endgames in this opening. There is a line here that goes c4 after the exchange variation, and the point is, if black were to take, then you would take back like this, and you would have a bishop nicely developed, while black has nothing past the second rank, and you already have a bishop and a pawn in the center. So black has to develop quickly in order to catch up in development. However, and the main line for this is to go knight f6, then white adds pressure to this d5 pawn. Black can defend it with moves like e6 to try to solidify the pawn. However, sometimes in some games you might get g6, queen b3 to try to accumulate even more pressure over here, and bishop g7, and basically you give, as black, you give white this pawn, and you argue that you have a lead in development. You're already castled, you've got your nice setup over here, while white needs 2 to 3 moves to castle themselves, and you've sacrificed a pawn, but you have a lead in development, and those pawns are kind of sitting ducks. While they control some squares over here, they might be targets for moves like I don't know, like knight a6, and to try to control some squares over here, you can use also flank pawn pushes, like a5, a4 to deflect the white queen. from defending those pawns. And you might also just develop your bishop and go for an attack on the king. But we do not get that in this particular game. We do not get c4. We get instead bishop d3, which just develops the bishop. Knight c6, it adds pressure to this pawn and tells white that if white is not going to defend that pawn, black will take it gladly. So Magnus Carlsen defends, Wesley develops his queen. Queen c7 is usually a nice move to get on this nice diagonal on the king, and if the king castles in the future, then you will have a queen lined up here. And also, if this knight ever were to move, your queen would have a semi-open c-file to work with. So we get queen c7, knight e2, which strikes me as a bit of a strange move, since you could go theoretically knight f3 here, but perhaps you do not want to allow black to develop his bishop with an attack on your knights. You might play h3, but the black then will gladly take queen f3 and then solidify his pawn chain with e6. And black has just a very nice and solid position, so maybe Magnus did not like that. He played knight e2 instead. Then knight f6 came. I mean, you have to develop your pieces at some point, so you might as well start by developing your knight. Bishop f4, attacking the queen, defended by the knight. So actually this is the idea of playing knight e2 instead of knight f3, that now this knight defends this bishop and the queen is forced to move, unless it gets protected by the e5 pawn. E5, we get takes, knight takes, and you can see that white has kind of exposed black has kind of exposed his king over here, right? So while you could go here, and then check, maybe this is not exactly what you want. Maybe you do not want to allow this queen to centralize and have pressure on your king and your knight over here. So we do not get takes, instead we get bishop b5 check right away. And here, any normal human being here plays bishop to d7, and if takes, well then we get takes with the knight, and the black king can still castle. The game would proceed something like castles, bishop e7, maybe not bishop e7 because this hangs a pawn. So let's say castles, knight f6 maybe. Alright, well apparently knight d4 is incredibly good for white, but the reason for that is unknown. Okay, maybe because then you can accumulate pressure on this knight over here and it's pretty hard to defend it. And what if here? Yeah, then you just lose your bishop. I mean, you don't lose your bishop, but you just give white unnecessary positional advantages. But yeah, we would get something like this if this was a game played by anyone up to perhaps 22,000, 23,000 FIDE. But super GMs are mad lads. So here Wesley So goes king to d8. He voluntarily moves his king over. He voluntarily concedes his right to castle, and he says that he is fine in this position and he doesn't need his king to be castled, and his king on d8 will be completely safe. While I do not recommend this approach, it might be the best. You might get some quick development for sacrificing your right to castle, but I honestly would never play like this myself. Magnus here castles, he puts his king out of the center, which Wesley cannot do anymore. Castling is in general good to just avoid any sorts of pressure from the central pieces, since your king here is just much safer, defended by the rook and the pawns, whereas in the center it's much more open. It has much less defenders around it. So Magnus castles, Wesley plays bishop d6 to solidify this knight over here, to add another defender. Magnus plays knight d2, he develops his other knight, he cannot go to c3 because the pawn's already there, so he goes to d2. Wesley plays bishop e6, solidifies his d5 pawn and also finishes his development. Magnus now plays knight d4, sorry, to try to attack this bishop. And Wesley says, I do not care, you can have my bishop, it's no problem, but I'm going to attack your bishop over here. And here, according to the engine, Magnus Carlsen made a mistake. He sacrificed his bishop, he sacrificed actually his rook, that we're going to see in a moment, for a knight and a pawn. So it looked something like this. While you could take over here, and Wesley takes back, and then you could just come back, for example, to e2. This is still a good position for white, since black cannot castle, and it's going to take him a couple more moves to bring both rooks to the center and to consolidate his position. But we can also get something like bishop e2 right away, then the game would proceed like something like this, then rook takes, and perhaps Magnus didn't like it as well, since Magnus is giving Wesley some unnecessary activity. So here Magnus played rook e1, and to the untrained eye it just looks that he hung a bishop. He just forgot that his bishop is here. And well, how the hell is this a grandmaster level game? Well, let's see. Pawn takes, knight takes, the queen is attacked, so it has to move. Now we get knight takes d6, and while some of you might think that queen takes d6 is okay here, it's completely not. This is the point. And well, despite you only being down a pawn, the position is +7. You basically have to defend your position against white's threats, and you're not going to have a pleasant time playing this endgame. So Wesley does not blunder that. Wesley goes knight to d3. He allows this knight to be defended by the bishop, and he attacks Magnus's rook and Magnus's bishop instead. So both of these pieces cannot be defended. You cannot save both of them. So Magnus decides to, because if he plays like a move like rook f1, then he just loses his bishop, and his knight is actually trapped over here. So it has to sacrifice itself for the pawn, and Wesley is just up 2 pieces for 2 pawns, and it's pointless to continue playing this position. So Magnus does not do that. Magnus sacrifices his rook on e1 by playing bishop to g3. He gets his bishop out of danger of the knight, while continuing to defend his knight over here. So Wesley takes the rook, Magnus recaptures, and Wesley plays knight h5. Why does Wesley play knight h5? Well, he wants this bishop. He wants to trade off his knight for this bishop, since this bishop is defending this knight, and if you remove the defender of the knight, then you can pick it up as well. So yeah, that's basically the point of Wesley's move, and the only move suggested by the computer here, which keeps any advantage for white, is bishop to e5. Why is that good, you say? Well, if for example a move like f6 happens, the computer is a complete lunatic and says to play knight b3. What happens if pawn takes, you say? Well, we can either recapture, or we can play this ludicrous move knight to c5. Did Magnus just hang 3 of his pieces? What the hell is happening? No, there is a fork on this square, which is one of the nastiest tactics I've ever seen in chess. King d7 and knight takes and king takes, And basically it's an endgame where white has a rook and a queen for 2 rooks and a knight and a bishop. Black is of course less pawns than white, but it's a fascinating position. It's so unbalanced. I would love to play it. Like from this position I would like to play both as white and as black, since I would actually like to test my skills in the ascent game. But okay, this did not happen. If it did happen, this would be incredible, but this did not happen. So bishop, well, I kind of spoiled the blunder, but bishop e5 will lead to this incredible variation. But Magnus plays queen to e5, and now he's officially losing the game. Why is he losing, you say? Well, he is losing because he's not going to be able to defend this knight. He's just not. His knight went over here, and it kind of went here to die. It doesn't have enough reinforcements supporting it. Since Wesley played knight h5, it was basically his original idea to take on g3, so he does it, and queen takes g3, and now this knight has only one defender. And the move that Wesley so played here, king to e7, basically wins the game on the spot. Since, how are you defending this knight? The threat is queen takes, king takes, and you've lost a piece. So how are you defending your knight? Well, Magnus Carlsen probably realized he blundered, and he tried defending his knight like this. But this just allows Wesley to take his knight. And now he plays rook d1, and tries to defend his knight like this, but currently Magnus is down a rook for a pawn. So that's not good. That's really not good. If you're down a rook for a pawn, then know that you're probably going to lose. Wesley plays queen c6 to get out of the possible discovered attack on your queen. Magnus plays h4. I don't know, he probably was just tilted. He didn't know what to do. He wanted to play one more move, but rook h to d8 is just a game ender, since you cannot defend this knight. You just can't. Despite your sacrifice here on c4, you cannot defend this knight. And like, let's see the top engine move. Engine says to play a3. I do not. I suppose it's trying to save this pawn, but a3. Rook takes, queen takes, king takes, and you have a couple, merely a couple of pawns, and black has a rook and a bishop. So black is 100% going to win this game, unless black is like 100 or 200 elo, but those are super GMs. So no super GM is going to lose this with black, unless maybe on time with 2 seconds on the clock. But yeah, no. So this was a cool game. It really teaches you not to wander off with your knights to outposts when they do not have a pawn supporting them. So if there was a pawn on e5 or c5, this would be a completely different story. Then this knight here would be incredibly good. But frankly, when it doesn't have a pawn defending it on an outpost square, then it's just going to be a target. And this game was a brilliant example of that. Magnus just overestimated his abilities, and he could not defend the knight. He just couldn't. He sacrificed here, and if takes, I think actually taking back this pawn would, no, it wouldn't have been better. Yeah, no. There's no point. Rook d8, queen c7, getting out of the pin, and just rook f to d8, rook h to d8, sorry. And this knight is lost, and the game is lost. So in this position, Magnus Carlsen resigned. He lost a game to Wesley So. Well, I hope you enjoyed my analysis. Let me know what you thought in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like or subscribe, or even share the video with your friends if you would be so generous. And yeah, that was it. The game, this was a pretty short game for a Grandmaster game, but well, it shows you that doing your puzzle rush and tactics, puzzle streak, sorry, on lichess, and practicing your tactics is important, because it can win you games, and it can prevent you from losing this game like Magnus Carlsen did. Alright, that was it. Let me know if you enjoyed the video in the comments. Hope you had a great Christmas and New Year's Eve, and leave any suggestions on what you would like to see in the comments. I would appreciate any new ideas very much. Alright, see you in the next video. Bye!